Will Iran-Israel war redraw the Middle East? Could Iran quitting NPT break global nuclear rules? Can oil markets survive a Red Sea shock? Moneycontrol speaks to V Pant, Vice President, Studies and Foreign Policy at ORF.
I think this has been one of the most significant challenges to the regional order in the Middle East that we have seen in a long time. Of course, Middle East has constantly been unstable, and underlying realities have been shifting for a while. But this is the first overt attempt to reshape the Middle Eastern order since perhaps the George W. Bush attempt to recreate democracy in Iraq, which we know how it panned out. But I think a proxy war that was going on between Iran and Israel is now out into the open, and it's a make or break situation for both countries. For Israel, it seemed like a moment of opportunity after it had degraded Hezbollah and Hamas to go to the real problem, according to Israel, which is Iran and its regime. And therefore, they decided to use this opportunity to target the nuclear infrastructure and to dismantle it. At least that's the strategic goal of this campaign. If the regime changes in the process, then that's a bonus for Israel. For Iran, of course, and for the Iranian regime, this is a critical juncture. It is almost this is a most significant challenge they've faced to their survival in a long time, and I do think that there is a lot of pressure on the regime. So we are going to see continued escalation, but in the process, we are going to also see how new kinds of realities emerge. We are seeing US-Israel relationship being tested. Because US has been dragged into a conflict, particularly Trump administration, which had come to office saying they don't want to fight any wars. And now they are having to consider how much to involve themselves and whether using American forces in Israel might be a good idea. One thing is certain, that an acceleration of Iranian nuclear program perhaps is going to be one of the consequences. Whether the regime survives, whether it does not survive, I think any future Iranian regime will look at the nuclear question, will look at the nuclear issue as something of a survival issue. So I do think that there are many issues, there are many fundamentals of the region that might change post this conflict. See, I don't think international, nuclear non-proliferation treaty is in any case very strong. The norms are very strong. We have seen. I think the lessons that countries are learning increasingly is that perhaps it's good to have nuclear weapons rather than not to have. If you look at what happened to Saddam Hussein, if you look at what happened to Gaddafi in Libya, they did not have weapons of mass destruction, but they ended up in ways that perhaps reflected on what major powers are able to do when you don't have a deterrent capability. Whereas you look at the other situation in North Korea, where the regime survives despite all the economic challenges it faces, because it has a patina of this idea that it has some credibility, some nuclear capability. So I do think that the fundamental hypocrisy ingrained in the nuclear non-proliferation treaty is now out into the open. It is making countries realize its impotence. It is making also countries realize the need to have its own deterrence. I think this particular issue of Iran is interesting because if Iran decides to go down the route of overt nuclearization, which it's very much possible after this it would, then it's not simply about Iran and Israel. It is also that there are Arab states in the Gulf who are looking at it warily. They don't like Iranian nuclear capability. The whole Shia-Sunni rivalry is very strong. And I think Saudis certainly have the latent capability in some ways. After all, they have been linked with the Pakistani nuclear program as well. NATO countries, you have countries along the Russian border which are now wary of Russian aggression. I think all of these matters, then, the Pandora's box gets opened, and many countries will see are already seeing nuclear deterrence as an attractive option. But if Iran goes nuclear overtly, then there are enormous challenges going to be for the nuclear non-proliferation regime, of course, but in the Middle East as well as the wider world, where proliferation perhaps may become even bigger a norm, bigger norm than it is at the moment. See, the vulnerability is quite stark, and we know that every time there is a crisis in the Middle East, we see oil market volatility. We see oil prices rising. Certainly, we have seen energy prices go up in the last few days as this conflict has escalated. And the expectation is that if it continues to escalate, we are going to see once again a challenge for the global energy markets and for individual countries. And for a country like India that relies on oil from the Middle East to sustain its rates of growth, India wants to grow at 6, 7, 8% rates of growth, and without stable energy supplies, it's just not possible. So I do think that the challenge for the energy market is rising, and one of the issues that perhaps the world is watching is this Iranian threat at times in the past of blocking Strait of Hormuz, and that that is certainly a lever that Iran has, and Iran has often talked about it. Question, of course, is that whether Iran would go ahead and do it, and what it would do for Iranian credibility, because right now, if you look at the energy dependence and energy flows, you have Asia as the biggest source of energy, consumption from the region. And if something like a blockade or even partial blockade happens, then the worst affected would be Asian economies, China, India, Japan, and that would not serve Iranian interests, because that is something that Iran has a problem with the West. Iran has a problem with the US in particular. Iran has a problem with Israel. But if it goes ahead and blocks or creates problems in the Strait of Hormuz, then there is going to be a challenge for the Asian markets, and I think that is something that Iran may not want to do, because it might destroy its credibility as a reliable partner. So I do think that it's not that easy to do, but certainly Iran has the leverage to do it. See, I think India, of course, has for a very long time in the Middle East, India has maintained that it has good ties, or it has been able to maintain good ties with all three poles in the Middle Eastern system, right? So you have the Arab states in the Gulf, you have Israel, and you have Iran, with very different ideas about their foreign policy. And India has managed so far relationships with them independently of each other. And all these relationships are critical for India from different vantage points. Where with Iran, of course, there has always been our historical relationship. There has always been a relationship of respect. There has been a relationship with regard to connectivity, where Chabahar is seen as an alternative to, in some ways, Gwadar, and China's attempt to keep India out of certain geographies. So India has been trying to use Chabahar to reach out to Afghanistan, Central Asia. And so I think the relationship has been quite solid with Iran. And despite the sanctions by the West, India has been able to maintain a relationship with Iran, which has been quite important and significant. Now, the challenge, of course, is that for India, now as the fault lines between these Iran and Israel have really blown up, how do you maintain that middle path? How do you maintain your relationships with critical actors like Iran and Israel? And India has so far focused on trying to talk about de-escalation. India has talked about how restraint is important, and I think India has also shown by example how in the contemporary world, use of force has limited returns. So if you look at India, which fought recently, there was a conflict with Pakistan. India decided to achieve its objectives and then take a step back. Whereas if you have seen Israel, for example, Israel has been stuck fighting a war first with Hamas and now with Iran. And I think that is something that India can certainly showcase, that look, that use of force should be done in a manner where it is calibrated, where it is contextualized, and where it is where you are in control of how you use your military power. I think that's very likely to happen. We are going to see the global fault lines being replicated in the region. And in particular, I do think that for America, of course, America has always been a very important player in the region, in the Middle East. American alliances in the region have ensured that American presence in the region remains significant, and that America's role in the region remains in some ways a guarantor of regional relationships. So during Mr. Trump's first term, the Abraham Accords, for example, they were pushed by the US, and in some ways it brought the Arab world and the Israelis together. And that, I think, is America would continue to do that. We just had Mr. Trump visiting the region, in fact, before the conflict escalated in the Middle East. So Trump and the region will continue to work together, the Arab Gulf states and the Israelis will remain for the foreseeable future a bloc. Given that China and Russia have invested in Iran, Russians, of course, signed a recent strategic partnership agreement with Iran earlier this year. So clearly, both sides see Iran as a potential partner in their attempt to position themselves against the West. They would not like to see Iran getting weakened beyond a point. So clearly, they are positioning themselves in putting forth some kind of a resistance to what America might be planning to do. And I do think that this is going to coalesce into something more significant. That this is, ultimately global politics, global fault lines. We will see them being reflected in the region as well. The question is how far Israelis and the Americans will go in challenging Iran, and how far Russia and China will go in supporting Iran. So far, apart from rhetoric, Russians and the Chinese have not said much on Iran, but they are increasingly now becoming more vocal because they also realize, particularly for Russia, Russia has already lost Syria in some ways. Syria was their main ally, and now Iran is an ally. So Russians are facing some challenges in the region, and they would not like to lose Iran as an ally. China also certainly would not like to lose Iran as a bulwark against American presence in the region. So I do think that there'll be investment going forward from Chinese and the Russians. What kind of investment that is, what kind of support they are willing to provide, that would make for an interesting, reading of the region. Multilateral institutions were already having less and less credibility in the last decade. That credibility was going down already, and this conflict does not help matters. This is a challenge to the way both IAEA has performed its duty and to the way UN has almost become irrelevant to the bigger questions of peace and security. If you look at what has been happening over the last few years, UN has been completely irrelevant to many of these conflicts that are now going on in the world, around the world. And I think that shows that the world is no longer interested in what the UN has to say, what the UN does, particularly on peace and security matters. And IAEA, of course, has been the credibility of IAEA has been a bit suspect for some time. But the challenge there is that IAEA, even if it does competent job as a technical agency, the political receptivity of those ideas in major capitals in the world has to be taken into account, and that has not been there. So clearly, multilateralism once again has been shown to be the weak link, and its inability to manage global governance at this very, very critical juncture underscores why we need a new international architecture of institutions to manage some of these challenges.